The last time we saw this, the generation before that would have been artists was born during the Great Depression. They would have been born right in the middle of the Depression and, seen the World War II break out in front of them. And this generation had to go through lockdown. They were locked in their homes during pandemic. I would say this generation doesn't really get a normal childhood. Something disrupts it. The Great Depression disrupted a lot of childhoods in the 1930s. They didn't get a normal experience of it. They may not have gone to school. They might have had to go work for a living for their family, because everything was in chaos and upheaval. And then World War II breaks out and keeps the chaos going.
Yeah.
This generation is very similar. They have a pandemic they had to deal with as children. They had to be locked in their homes. Like all these things, wear masks. All this stuff is not a normal cycle of life they've had to deal with very early on. And so I think what you're saying is that shapes what we're saying is that shapes how they show up to the world, the songs they sing, the art they bring forward. They can speak to a little bit of what the world was before, but also what's coming up into the future.
Yeah. And their big influence in the way that prophets, their big influence is that spiritual awakening, and end up very influential in like politics and religion. And then nomads end up very influential in technology and in industry. And heroes end up very influential in also politics oftentimes, but in activism and in, becoming, heroes for war and that sort of thing. The artist generation ends up becoming influential in art. Now, the previous version, we called them the silent generation, interestingly enough. And in part, they didn't take a lot of positions in politics. Now, there is some in politics, but what's fascinating is that we've never had an artist, quote unquote, of that generation, of the silent generation. We never had a president of that generation until Joe Biden. He's the first artist generation that ever became a sitting president, which is fascinating. And he's he is considered an elderly president at this point. So all of those many, many, many decades, we never had one from that generation. We've had other politicians from that generation, but never a president.
Well, they're all in the arts. I mean, just like the nomads are in technology and not government, the artists are in the arts and maybe not government.
Right.
And again, the last cycle of this, the children that were born during the Great Depression and World War II grew up and were the Bob Dylans, the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Rush, like all these. Well, Rush is younger; they're probably boomers. But some of these early, the Beatniks in the 1950s.
That's right, like Jack Kerouac.
What's his name? Ginsberg. All these writers and influencers that were creating art. They kind of started to challenge this whole collectivist 1950s Red Scare movement type energy.
Right.
They're saying, wait a minute here. And they're starting to release thinking and art around this, which influenced the baby boomers and the prophets.
You got it.
Which is interesting, right? You see these cycles start to go.
Right. Which then helps spark a spiritual awakening.
Yeah.
Yep. And so these 4 generations, and then it starts over again. After the artists, then another generation of prophets is born, and the cycle begins all over again.